Welcome to Welfare Clinic. Today we have a very special guest. Guest needs no introduction. He has been former member of Bethnal Green and Bow and Bradford West, who has been outspoken on issues affecting peoples of this country and around the world. It's none other than George Galloway. George, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure.
I want to start off talking about the European referendum and your support for the grassroots campaign. And you recently attended a rally with Nigel Farage. Knowing you well as I do, I thought, how was it to be in a platform with a man that you literally have nothing in common?
Well, there were a lot of Labour people too on the platform, although some of them I didn't have anything in common with either. The truth is, this is a binary choice, one or the other. There's no shades of grey permitted. You either vote to stay in the European Union or you vote to leave it. So, undoubtedly, there are people, you could call them strange bedfellows, on either side of the aisle. Those who wish to remain include Jeremy Clarkson, Tony Blair, Goldman Sachs, David Cameron, George Osborne. I could go on, and that must be uncomfortable for people who are Labour inclined to be on the same side of an argument with them. And ditto me with some of the people I shared a platform with at that out rally. But I'm convinced after the events in Greece, and I announced this. Nobody seemed to notice it very much. I announced this over a year ago at a meeting on Greece, that I could no longer urge anyone to support this European Union. It's not because I don't like Europe. I love Europe. It's not because I don't like unity. I love unity. But this particular political organization called the EU, now called the EU, when we first voted for it, it wasn't, of course, a union. It was a common market. I campaigned against it under the leadership of Mr. Tony Benn, my political father, then for most of my life, and we lost. But over the decades, the common market has become something quite different. It's become a trap for our own people, and a trap that keeps out people like you from a Commonwealth background. And one of the reasons why I'm campaigning in the East End is to persuade Commonwealth citizens that actually they have the most to gain from leaving the EU, both in terms of immigration and in terms of job opportunities. You know, once upon a time, citizens of the Commonwealth had preference here, as well they should, because we stole everything the Commonwealth had to offer. So the least we owed them was a visa without having to crawl through a hoop to get it.
But there's a lot of restriction now on people coming from Commonwealth in terms of immigration.
You have the bride price, having to show £18,000 worth of income.
I think it's 23 now.
23 now. It's a huge sum for people to show on paper that they are earning. The difficulties of getting visas. You call this the welfare clinic. As you know, for nearly 30 years as an MP, I had a weekly welfare clinic, and most of the cases were about visas. And it's like getting a camel through the eye of a needle to get a Commonwealth citizen in, even for a wedding or a funeral or other vital family occasions. Whereas a Bulgarian can walk in with all his wives and all his family anytime at all without a visa, live here, work here, claim here, put his name down for a council house here, and so on. So I think that Britain's 7 million Commonwealth citizens have the most to gain from Britain leaving the EU.
I believe you was strongly in favour of staying in Europe not so long ago. What has changed that you are now campaigning to leave Europe?
2 years ago, I announced, 21 months ago, I announced that I could no longer support the European Union, and it was over the issue of Greece, because that showed that the EU had become a European Central Bank, IMF, European Commission, Troika, that was ready to crush any individual democracy. If people in Ireland voted to reject the Lisbon Treaty as they did, they were forced to vote again until they changed the result. The people of Greece voted and then voted again and then voted again for a course of action that would have ended the horrific austerity. We've had bad austerity here. But the people of Greece, half of the children in Greece are hungry, literally hungry officially, according to European statistics. More than a third of the health budget in Greece has been completely demolished. So the treatment of Greece and other countries like Spain, Portugal, Ireland persuaded me that actually, insofar as the European Union had ever done anything good for us, and you could say a few small things in the late 80s, early 90s, this was dead now, and that we would no more want to be in their embrace than we would like to be in the embrace of the IMF and the World Bank.
But do you think when the In campaign, the Stronger in Britain campaign, argues that if we leave Europe, we will have less power, we'll be isolated, we wouldn't be getting any support that we get at this moment? And often, and I've heard you before saying that the Europe is kind of controlled by unelected representative. What would you say to their supporters in response to that?
Well, first of all, the influence that they mean when they usually talk about this is the kind of influence I have no wish to exercise. They mean influence over bullying people in other countries. They mean influence as in making war against other countries, like Libya, for example, which we and the EU and Obama, but he didn't want to, but Sarkozy and Cameron drove forward a project to totally destroy Libya. And look how that has worked out. So that kind of influence, actually, I don't want. I want us to use our influence to make Britain better. Secondly, we'll of course still be a country of some importance. We have quite a big population. We have a big economy, the fifth biggest in the world. Nobody's going to want to stop selling us things. Mercedes-Benz and Audi are not going to say, well, we're not going to sell our cars to these British people who want to buy them. They'll still buy from us. We'll still buy from them. We won't be leaving Europe. We'll just be leaving the European Union, which is, as you know, a different thing. And the way I look at it, we'll be leaving the European Union and rejoining the world. And in particular, we'll be rejoining the Commonwealth, parts of which have done extraordinarily well since we slammed the door in their face back in 1973. India is one of the biggest and most important economies in the world.
The one country in the world don't like anybody interfering in their sovereign countries, United States.
Yes.
Now Barack Obama is going to be coming to our country next month, wanting to tell citizens of this country what we should do and shouldn't do. Don't you think it's a bit rich for a president of a country who wouldn't allow anybody else to have any say whatsoever, want to come and say to citizens of another sovereign country what they should be doing?
Well, it is extraordinary hypocrisy. They overthrew British rule because they couldn't accept being influenced or governed by a foreign power. But they want us to be governed by 28 foreign powers, because that's what we're talking about. 28 that will become soon 35, will include countries like Turkey, which are on fire, which are ravaged right now by war. We'll be bringing the Middle East wars right into the European Union with freedom of movement. So it is an offense, actually, against democracy that President Obama is going to come here and lecture us all as to what our future should be. As you rightly point out, he would never accept it. Americans would never accept it from anyone else about their affairs. They're in a free trade area with Canada and Mexico. And I'm quite happy to trade freely with the countries of the European Union. But they would never allow Canada and Mexico to make decisions about American policy. Neither should we be ready to be outvoted by Slovakia and Romania.
We would never dream of leaving United Nations or NATO. Why should Britain leave Europe?
Well, as for NATO, I would leave it tomorrow. I would never have joined it. NATO is the US-dominated war machine that has dragged us into a series of very damaging confrontations recently. I mentioned one of them, Libya, but an even more damaging one, arguably, is the confrontation with Russia, which is completely unnecessary. It's nothing to do with us, what happens in Ukraine, but it's everything to do with Russia, because 45% of the people of Ukraine are Russians. Yes. So they have a vital stake in that. We have no stake in it, yet we have sanctioned Russia. We are constantly talking about potential war with Russia. This is all absurd. This would mean the end of humanity on the planet if we went to war with Russia, a multiply nuclear armed power. Yet NATO is moving its borders closer and closer and closer to Russia. And that's a very damaging thing. So I would leave NATO tomorrow, and I regret that Labour, which once campaigned to review our position in NATO, has now apparently dropped that. As for the UN, you know, there are many times when I would like to leave the UN too. I'm not proposing that, but the UN effectively is a plaything of the big powers. And worse than that, it exercises complete double standards. So Iraq, for example, is broken on the wheel of United Nations sanctions, then invaded and occupied, and look how that turned out. Whilst Israel, which has nuclear weapons, hundreds of them, has biological weapons, has chemical weapons, has regularly invaded and occupied its neighbors, and is repressing the Palestinian people day and daily in front of our eyes if we care to open them. Not only do they not suffer any United Nations sanctions, the red carpet is rolled out in front of their leaders, while the Palestinians are described as terrorists.
Now, I think it's a very crucial point, I think, for our viewers when it comes to Palestinian, because a lot of people look up to United Nations and to see what steps or action they will take against Israel. But there seems to be no action whatsoever. And as you quite rightly pointed out, that they roll red carpets. And I think people sometimes wonder what is the purpose of having United Nations when they're not going to be, they're supposed to be impartial, but as they're dominated by the big players of the world, and they often are not seen to be impartial, and they seem to be taking sides.
I think that's right. If it weren't for the existence of some worthy United Nations organs, like the Refugee Relief and Works Agency, for example, without which the Palestinian refugees could not eat or their children could not be taught, I would advocate leaving the United Nations, if only to provide the shock value that people have completely lost confidence in this organization. Israel has broken more United Nations resolutions than all the other countries in the world put together, and yet no hint of sanction or punishment has there ever been to punish them for that. Whilst other countries, Iraq for example, which actually as it turned out was not in breach of any United Nations resolutions, it had no weapons of mass destruction, was broken into pieces. And we're all paying the price now. The Iraqis have paid a gigantic price, but the rest of us are now starting to pay a very big price for that too.
Half of everything that we sell to the rest of the world, we sell to Europe. We raise significant revenues of millions and billions of pounds every year. If we were to leave Europe, wouldn't Britain be economically more at loss than
well,
if we were to
actually, we're paying them, not them paying us. We pay them £50 million every day. Now, as I walk around here, around Tower Hamlets, just one day of the money we give to the European Union could transform the landscape here. A week, we could make this Las Vegas. We could make this Beverly Hills. So we're paying them. The net deficit from us to them is £50 million every single day. That's £350 million every single week. We'll still sell to them, and they'll still sell to us. And they wouldn't dream of putting tariffs on our manufactured goods, because we would put tariff on theirs. And we're a very big and quite prosperous market. So that will not happen. We'll continue to trade with them, as Switzerland and other countries who are not in the EU trade with them. The one thing that isn't spoken, but which is the one area in which we would be at a disadvantage, is that the City of London, the square mile, just a few hundred yards from here, would not have the stranglehold, the dominant position in the European Union that it has now. Well, tough luck. I won't cry any tears if Britain's financial sector has to readjust its role in the world. Actually, most of them ought to be in jail, never mind lording it over the European Union. It's only in financial services that we would suffer any kind of economic penalty. And as I believe these bankers and financiers and hedge fund managers and the rest are not actually involved in economic activity at all. It's a kind of smoke and mirrors magic trick, all of it. It has actually brought us down rather than build us up. It's made some people very, 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 very rich. But those living in its shadow, here in Tower Hamlets, as I always used to say, looking up at the gleaming spires of the city and turning left and looking up at the gleaming towers of Canary Wharf, but in between, some of the poorest people in England were trying to make a living.
The one final thing I want to ask you before we move on to your election for London Mayor is that a couple of days ago there was an election took place in Germany, where through regional election there have been a huge gain for anti-immigration parties for supporting for refugees by the German Chancellor. Obviously, this country has been very reluctant to welcome refugees. You know, Cameron said 20,000 over the next 5 years or 4 years. What would your message be in terms of supporting refugees? And I know you have a very good connection with places like Syria and other Middle East countries, and you have done a lot of work for those countries over the many years.
Well, I think we have to unbundle or separate the issues of migration and issues of refugees. Every country has the right to decide how many migrants it takes and from where it takes them. As I said, I want to take them from Bangladesh, from India, from Pakistan, from the Caribbean, because they speak our language, we have a common history with them, and we owe them big time. That's a separate matter. Every country has an absolute duty to take refugees, and the only way it can be done is to take them fairly. And David Cameron's policy is not fair. Angela Merkel has taken 1 million refugees into Germany, and David Cameron, as you rightly say, is taking so few that you can almost not measure them once they're distributed around the country. That's unfair, it's unjust, especially if you're a member of a so-called European Union. Now the German political parties, or at least the government, are paying a price at the ballot box for the fact that they have behaved fairly. It is important to keep this in perspective. The right-wing, far-right did gain, but the parties which remain in power in those three regions are people who support Angela Merkel's policy or more. The Social Democrats remain in power in one, the Green Party remain in power in the second, and Angela Merkel remains in power in the third. So it was a disturbing rise, but we should keep it in that perspective. Germany is not about to become some kind of new Nazi country, not at all. But the real issue over the refugees is why they're being forced to come here and leave their own homes in the first place. And as you well know, I have opposed these wars which are driving this refugee crisis. 90% of the refugees are from three countries: Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. You don't have to be Einstein to work out what these three countries have in common. Two of them have been invaded and occupied by NATO and by countries like ours. And the third, Syria, has been devastated by a Western-sponsored war, paid for by our pet dictators in the Gulf. And so we are responsible for these refugees. We're responsible for the fact that they had to flee, and we're responsible for the fact that once they've fled, they have to have a roof over their heads until they can go back home. So the best thing to do would be to end the wars in these three countries. Of course, we should never have started the wars in the first place, but we need to move in the direction of ending these wars rather than keeping them going.
As I said, you're also standing to be the mayor of London on 5th of May this year. It's not very long now before the election day comes. How are you different from Sadiq Khan or any other candidates, and why do you believe that real Labour voters or Corbyn supporters should vote for you?
Well, I'm standing to support Jeremy Corbyn's policies and his approach, and the Labour candidate takes every opportunity, every day, to rubbish Jeremy Corbyn and his policies, and often in the most unsavoury places. He chooses the worst newspapers in which to announce the most damaging attacks on Jeremy Corbyn. So if you're a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, you definitely should be supporting me. I was his comrade in Parliament, sitting next to him most of the time for almost 30 years. I've marched next to him for almost 40 years, and if I'm elected as mayor, I will work with him to oppose David Cameron and all his works. As it happens, because of the election rules, you can vote for both. You can give me your first preference vote. If you want, you can give Sadiq Khan your second preference vote, and if I go out before Sadiq Khan, then the vote you gave to me just gets transferred over. So there's no question of splitting the vote, letting the Tories in, or any of that that we normally face in elections when we're standing from the left of Labour. That doesn't apply in this case. So I'm hoping that I will come ahead of Sadiq Khan, and if I do, then I think most people who vote for him will give me their second preference, and then I could be the Mayor of London, and it would be very different indeed from Boris Johnson's era if I became the Mayor of London. Think Ken Livingstone plus the advances of the last decade almost, in terms of new technology, new ideas, and so on. So it would be a London for all. That's my slogan. A London for all, not just those dripping in gold. You know, Sadiq Khan keeps saying that he'll be the most pro-business mayor in London's history. Well, I won't be. I'll be the most pro-worker mayor in London's history. Business doesn't actually need a mayor on their side. They are already rich and powerful. It's small businesses like the kind that proliferate around here, and working class people who need a mayor on their side as a counterbalance to the rich and powerful, not a mayor who's actually going to plant himself in the interests of the rich and powerful.
Some people will say you are divisive, you're toxic, your appeal is limited, especially when it comes to Tower Hamlets and Bradford. What would be your message to those individuals or
Well, as you know, I won a pretty historic victory here in Tower Hamlets. I defeated one of Tony Blair's brightest stars here in 2005. And in 2012, I won the biggest swing to the left in British political history in the Bradford West by-election. Of course, if I wear these things, no one will vote for me, in which case nobody has anything to worry about. What they mean when they say that is that I make a strong stand. And if you make a strong stand on something, the people who take a strong stand to the opposite are going to hate you. I apologize for going back to the Palestine issue. But if you've spent 40 years like me, standing absolutely solid with the Palestinians, those that love Israel are going to hate you. And those that love Israel are quite powerful people, actually, a lot of them. They have money, they have media power, they have positions in many media organizations and in the political class. And if they hate you, they're going to make sure everyone knows why they hate you, and they're going to distort and lie. But these days, as your program and this television station proves, the so-called mainstream media is rapidly becoming the lamestream media. I have 1 million followers on social media. I can now send a message from here to 1 million people without going through a single television executive, without going through a single editor or a single multimillionaire media owner. And thus the balance is beginning to shift.
We're coming to end of the show, George. I just want to get what is your priority and your ideas and how you are different from the other mayoral candidates in this election.
Well, in detail, people can go to Galloway2016.London. That's my new website, which gives all of my policies. But in short, the housing crisis, which people in Tower Hamlets know all about, is my #1 priority. I'm going to lead the drive to build hundreds of thousands of council houses. Council houses are the best form of housing. You get to sack your landlord every year in the council elections. Council housing, in which I grew up, provides the best start for ordinary people. It's not that I'm against people owning their homes, but we have the highest house prices and the highest rents in the whole world here in London. And we have the highest tube fares, actually. So you get moved out of Tower Hamlets as far as the eye can see, much farther than the eye can see, and then you have to pay through the nose on the world's most expensive tube to come back here. Housing, police, I'm going to make sure that the police looks like London and is led by people who look like London, not looking like an occupation force sent in by someone else. And on the subject of transport, this is a big one. All students, school students, college students, and university students will travel free on public transport if I'm the mayor, because their EMA was stolen if they're at school. They've had their tuition fees tripled to £9,000 a year if they're college or university students. I'm going to make sure London gives back to our young people. Free buses, free tubes for all school children and students. That's quite a big offer.
George, thank you very much for coming to our show. No doubt we'll be speaking to you more leading up to the election, finding out exactly what you're standing for and how you're going to represent the people of London.
Look forward to it.
Dear viewers, I hope you got ideas why you should leave Europe. As promised last week, we did a show why you should stay in. You do your research, listen to both sides of the argument, and you'll make your decision. But on 5th of May, you will be making a very important decision as to how London should be run and by whom. And it is your decision. We have Mr. Galloway here today. You heard from him why he's standing, what are his priorities, and what he's going to be doing. We will invite other candidates to also come and put their arguments forwards as to why they are standing. Again, do your research. Vote for somebody that you feel will stand up for your community and your neighbors and the future generation of this country, and put a cross next to that individual name on 5th of May. Thank you for watching Welfare Clinic.